Shaken baby syndrome, what happens when a baby is shaken, and more importantly, at the end, I'm going to talk to you about a prevention program that has been demonstrated to prevent the occurrences of shaken baby syndrome by introducing to parents the idea of crying as being a part of normal development and to anticipate that and have some strategies to manage that. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the definitions of what shaken baby syndrome is. So it is a form of abusive head trauma that results in brain injury caused by bleeding over the surface of the brain, causing swelling to the brain, and bleeding in the back of the eyes. And it's a constellation of injuries that isn't necessarily seen in other diseases or medical conditions. And that's why when a baby presents at an emergency room, it's this certain constellation of symptoms and identifiable injuries that cue the medical professionals that there's some sort of abuse that had happened. Now, oftentimes that's not so easy. Unfortunately, children who are abused aren't just shaken, but they may be thrown against the wall, or they may be hit or punched. So there's a lot more there's a lot of different types of injuries that can be combined. But what we're going to talk about tonight is more of a clean definition of a type of injury that happens when there's violent shaking. So that's again, the clinical definition is abusive head trauma that causes brain injury, bleeding on the surface of the brain, which leads to a dying off of the actual cells of the brain, swelling on the brain, and bleeding at the back of the eyes. And the bleeding at the back of the eyes is again part of this contre-coup type of an injury that we'll talk about more. Now, typically there's always legal charges involved. A person is charged with homicide, of course, if the child dies. Protective services are always involved. CPS is always involved. So a little bit about what shaken baby syndrome is and what it isn't, and some of the myths around that. It is a form of child abuse. Of course, if the child dies, it's homicide or murder. It's a unique and identifiable combination of injuries, as I mentioned, that's caused by this violent and forceful shaking. It's also preventable through education. And again, later in the talk, I'm going to introduce a program that has been shown to really prevent the incidence of shaken baby. So shaken baby is not some of the excuses that we hear when we pick up the newspaper and read about an incident of a child being brought to an emergency room. Some parents may consider shaking a form of punishment. It's not. A particular type of injury, this contre-coup injury, is not necessarily found to be part of a constellation of other injuries, unless, of course, as I said earlier, there's an array of different abuse that happened to the child. But a real contre-coup injury is clearly identifiable by this constellation of injuries. Oftentimes parents will, or abusers will state that there was some pre-existing medical condition or disease that contributed to the type of injuries that were shown, or the deficits that the child had after the injury. And it really has been shown that that's really not much of an excuse that carries much weight. It isn't necessarily seen with visible bruises. The bruising can occur on a continuum from something that's very severe, where children have lost all ability to move, to talk, to walk, any previous level of development that they may have lost. Or it may be very slight, where some of the resulting effects are more related to state regulation or processing speed, where there aren't visible signs of abuse, but some of the consequences will show up later in development as the child continues to grow and doesn't meet developmental milestones, begins to have delays in development, learning problems, behavior problems. Shaken baby syndrome is not caused by car accidents or falls or rough play. That's another myth that some people believe in, that a child can be injured by being in a car seat and the car stopping too fast, or by rough play, or parents tossing them in the air too quickly. And the type of injuries that are seen when a baby is shaken are not consistent with any bruising that could occur as a result of those type of injuries. It's much more severe. Shaken baby, the type of injuries with shaken baby syndrome aren't caused, they're not consistent with other injuries that are seen at birth, genetic disorders, or any other conditions. So some of the statistics with shaken baby is interesting. Now, in general, in the population, the categories that are found to have the highest number of traumatic brain injuries are actually children birth to 4, late adolescence into early adulthood, so 17, or actually it's more like 15 into 21, and then people over 65, and a lot of those are caused by falls in senior population, auto accidents for young drivers, biking accidents for teenagers, and for children under 4, a lot of traumatic brain injuries happen as a result of falls or as a result of abuse. In the percentage of children birth to 4 that have traumatic brain injury that's not related to falls, the highest percentage is related to incidents of shaken baby. So about 25% of infants that are shaken will actually die from the injuries, because the injuries are so profound to the brain that they may have lost the ability to breathe on their own, and they can't sustain life, that the injuries have been that severe. The remaining 75% can suffer severe brain damage, anywhere that from injuries to their motor strip, where they've lost capacity to control motor movements, speech, cognitive abilities, social emotional abilities. And approximately 60% of shaken baby victims either die from their injuries at a later time, or they suffer lifetime disabilities. So there's secondary conditions that result, such as seizure disorders, just a vulnerability to a variety of illnesses that result when someone has a severe injury to the central nervous system. Now, between 55% and about 70% of perpetrators are males. That's just shown by statistics. Shaken baby syndrome is the most common cause of death in physically abused children, and as I said, out of that population of the birth to 4, the highest percentage of injured children sustain the injury from an incident of shaking. The younger the child, the more likely the head injury is due to the abuse, and I'll go into that a little bit more when I get into talking about crying and incidents of abuse related to crying. Okay. As I mentioned, some of the injuries may not become apparent until the child enters school and begins to show some cognitive and behavior problems. A number of children that have been placed in foster care or are adopted because of abuse and neglect, the information isn't known what happened. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Some of the long-term consequences can be of the less severe cases where there isn't motor impairment. There's slower processing speed. There's slower development of social and emotional skills, interpersonal skills, the capacity to read the affect of other people, to be able to understand the nuances of social development. Behavioral problems, the inability to inhibit, a lot of impulsivity, attention problems. Oftentimes children that have early brain injuries will have very limited capacity to inhibit, which is a function of more higher level frontal lobe functioning, executive type of functioning activities. And there's even been occurrences of fatal cases of shaken baby that occurred in 5- and 6-year-olds. Adults also can suffer from severe shaking, although not as much because of some of the reasons that we'll talk about in a little while that have to do with why this is such a severe injury for infants and younger children, and that has to do with neural development. So the profile of a shaken child. So research has shown that shaken baby victims have some characteristics in common. Most of the victims are less than 1 year old. The majority are under 6 months old. And interesting, twins have a higher chance of being shaken than single children. Well, we can imagine that. If a parent is stressed and there's not only one baby crying, but there's two babies crying, parent stress level increases exponentially, and so twins are at a higher risk of being shaken than our single children. The majority under 6 months old occurs because of this pattern of developmental crying. Neurologically, one of the tasks that a child has to master is the regulation of arousal states, that kind of sleep-wake cycle. That takes time, as all of us know who have dealt with an infant. That cycle needs to gradually be mastered neurologically. Well, that's a difficult stage for a child. Oftentimes their arousal states are pretty pronounced. They're not able to regulate that on their own. They're in the process of developing the neural capacity to do that. And there's periods where there's excessive crying. That's how babies express themselves. Their heightened arousal states create prolonged periods of crying. So the profile of a shaker, unfortunately, perpetrators for the most part are male. Some reasons could be that they're less familiar with dealing with the needs of a baby. There's been some research that shows different types of parenting styles with mothers fathers, mothers being the ones that just innately are more involved with the calming, the nurturing, the soothing activities, where so the mother provides more of the proprioceptive input that calms and regulates that baby. Where fathers, on the other hand, have been shown to give more of the more arousal type of input, more vestibular. They're the ones that will toss the baby in the air or encourage that baby out of that womb to explore the world. So there are some innate differences in how men and women address the needs of a developing child. So that's considered one of the potential risk factors for a parent under high stress who maybe lacks regulatory skills of their own, but they are less familiar with ways to soothe and how to meet the baby's needs. Men may be feeling more financial stress or family stress. They might not be used to the baby's crying. They might use force to try to stop the baby from crying more so than a female might. Statistically, most men who shake a baby are the biological father or the mother's boyfriend. And that's just based on the numbers. Mothers, grandparents, of course, anybody, caregivers, child care providers also can shake babies as well. Really, anybody who's frustrated is capable of shaking a baby. So some activities that don't cause shaken baby, and again, this goes back to some of the myths around how babies can be injured. Really, some of the presenting reasons that have been heard in hospital settings when a child is brought to the ER. Babies falling off furniture, or a parent falling on the child, a baby being bounced on the parent's knee, being carried in a backpack while the mom takes a run, the baby being tossed in the air and caught. These aren't reasons. These aren't activities that would lead to the kind of injuries that are seen in shaken baby syndrome. So some of the signs that, the immediate signs and symptoms of severe shaking include just levels of consciousness. So there could be a slowing after a child is injured. Again, think of it like a concussion. There's a slowing that can happen in their cognitive processing, their response to stimulation in the environment. Lethargy, seizures can happen. There could be changes in their sensory processing, so they might not track sounds, or they might not visually track as they had been prior. Or there can be, autonomic signs if it's even more pronounced: difficulty breathing, changes in the color of the skin, loss of consciousness, vomiting. Those are all some of the immediate signs of brain injury to a child. And some of these lead to long-term effects. Some that I've mentioned already: the learning and cognitive disabilities, behavior disorders, depending on the injury to the eyes, and in the occipital lobe, there can be cortical blindness. There can be cerebral palsy. Cerebral palsy is one of those kind of catch-all umbrella terms that any kind of injury to the development of motor patterns can fit under that category. Incidence of cerebral palsy. Trauma-induced seizure disorders, again, loss of motor control. So some signs of less severe shaking can occur when there's changes in established sleep patterns, so that levels of alertness, if a child has established sleep patterns, a change more sleeping, less sleeping. There can be more states of restlessness and agitation, and a whimpering, crying, inability to be consoled, unintentional movements, an absence of energy, fatigue, slurring of speech, uncontrollable crying, and again, that inability to be consoled. There may be changes in how they eat or their eating patterns. Those are all more soft signs. So why is a baby so easily hurt? And this is where I'm going to talk about the difference between a contre-coup injury to a baby compared to an adult. You'll see why. A baby's body has unique characteristics that does make it vulnerable to increased injury from shaking than an older child, adolescent, or adult. And part of that has to do with just the weak neck muscles where they're not developed and they can't control the head as much. So if they're shaking, there's really limited ability to resist that back and forth shaking of the head that really causes a contre-coup injury, where the front part of the brain and the back part of the brain, the frontal lobe and the occipital lobe, are really injured. There's a lot of space inside the skull. You could think of a baby's brain as kind of a little sponge, a gelatinous sponge, and it's sitting inside of this space in the skull where there's a lot more space because there's less brain development than there would be in an older child, an adolescent, or adult. So there's a lot more space for that gelatinous immature brain to kind of slide around. And that can cause a lot of tearing to delicate veins, increased bleeding when there's bleeding on brain tissue. That's very acidic, so the brain tissues begin to die off very quickly. There's a process in brain injury called apoptosis where there's a pattern that begins when one, as cells begin to die, that other ones start to die off. It's not fully understood why that happens, but it's a process that happens very quickly. That's why with brain, like with concussion, sometimes you see just soft signs that increase over time if there's bleeding on the brain, because what's happening is that more and more tissues are being damaged due to this process of the cells dying off, apoptosis. Again, the brain is small, it's still developing, so it's vulnerable to injury. And the head of a baby is, it's about 25% of the body weight. The head of the baby is a lot bigger than the rest of the body. So I'm going to take a minute now and show you a simulator doll that I have. And Charlie, can we turn this now? So I am going to start the webcam, and I have a simulator doll that I use in some of the demonstrations that really give you a sense of some of what I was just describing. This is the simulator doll is designed to be fairly realistic in size, the proportion of the head to the body.
Paula?
Yes.
Do you want to go ahead and start sharing?
Oh, I'm sorry. Forgot a step there. Okay. Okay. Here's our baby. So this doll, thanks for reminding me, Charlie. That happens after 7 o'clock at night. My line turns off. Okay. This simulator doll is designed to, again, be fairly accurate in proportion of the head of an infant to the body, the weight, Now, what I'm going to do is actually show you what happens inside of an infant's head when they're shaking. So I'm going to turn the simulator doll on, and what you're going to see are some lights begin to flash. This doll will then start to cry, and I will simulate a shaking of it. It's always hard for me to do. I can't imagine myself ever shaking a baby. But this one is made for just that. So this is going to give you an idea of the areas of the brain that are injured. It's also going to give you an idea of how quickly this can happen. Frontal lobe, okay, thinking, emotions, all action. The rear part of the brain, the occipital lobe. This is the vision center. It's part of the brain that begins to make sense of what's seen. So in an Achondra injury, you're going to see where this part of the brain and this part of the brain are the first to be injured. So I'm going to turn this on. And see if she's going to cry for me. She's a well-used doll, so sometimes she doesn't want to cooperate or cry. So imagine you're a tired parent, and then one day you have a colicky baby, and this baby's like, this could be normal. So you try soothing the baby won't stop. Okay, stop. Please stop. 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 And what you're seeing now are two areas that are flashing. You're seeing the frontal lobes, and you're seeing the rear, the occipital lobes. Because that's the Achondra injury. The brain has just sort of slid back and forth, and it's hit the skull, the dura mater. And already at that point, that's enough force to begin to cause some damage in these areas. So let's say this baby is still crying, and I've really lost it. Okay, I'm a parent, I'm tired, and maybe I'm abusive. Now I'm really going to get this baby going. Well, now you're seeing where the middle part of the brain, the motor strip, is injured because the shearing has torn the middle section of the venous system. There is just so much damage at this point that that would be enough to cause motor damage. If it hit the mid part of the brain, this baby could be injured enough so it couldn't breathe on its own. So you can see it doesn't take much. And again, this simulator doll is designed to do just that, to show how much force would be needed in a baby this size to cause that kind of injury. So, not that much. And I think what's important to note is really how reinforcing that could be to a parent who doesn't have skills to manage their own stress, who doesn't have parenting skills to be able to soothe the child. They shake that baby, they can't see an injury, but the baby stopped crying. And that is reinforcing in some ways. So I'm going to turn this webcam off. Okay. Okay, so again, some of the reasons why this type of shaking to a young infant can be so damaging. There's disproportionate weight in the head compared to the body. The head is very heavy. It's about 25% of the body weight. There's very weak neck muscles, so there's no resistance to that coup, contra coup type of movement, that whiplash movement back and forth. There's no resistance. There's a lot of space inside that skull so that the brain is able to move around a lot more than it would be at a later stage of neural development when there's more actual brain tissue that's formed. A lot more tearing can happen. And the brain is still developing, so there's a vulnerability to injury. You know, we used to think that brain injury in children was less damaging than it was to adults. You know, the myth was, well, a baby has an injury or a young child has an injury and they're going to continue to grow, so they'll be able to make up for it. Well, what we know now is that that isn't the case at all, and that when a child has a brain injury, their developmental trajectory is considerably lower because they don't have the skills formed. They don't have the tissue formed. They don't have the neural networks functioning to a way that some of the skills have been developed with an older child or an adult, so that the brain can, in a sense, rewire more easily for an adult who has an injury to regain some functional ability than a young child's brain where they never had that functional ability to begin with. And now there's damage to the brain and damage to the white matter tracts as they develop. So actually the injuries are can carry much more of a toll with a young child than with an adult. Okay. So what causes shaking? Well, the number one trigger is to stop a baby from crying. Frustration builds. Caregiver doesn't know how to take care of themselves. They lose control and they shake the baby. Secondary triggers, you know, things like frustration with toilet training, just the regular functions of a developing child. So you can imagine how in situations of high stress or multi-problem families under considerable multiple stressors can be more vulnerable to injuring a child by shaking. But, you know, a cranky baby, children that have feeding problems, those are all secondary triggers that have been shown to increase the likelihood of abuse happening. There's a lot of costs involved, of course. The biggest is to the life of the child. Their normal development has been taken from them. There's changes in the family. There can be significant medical costs involved with their care, high education costs for special education, for the cognitive problems, behavior problems. So what we do know is that shaken baby syndrome is preventable. One of the programs that I'm going to talk with you about is called the Period of Purple Crying. And this is a program that was developed by the National Center on Shaken Baby Syndrome. And it's based on the work of a developmental pediatrician, Ronald Barr, who spent a number of years studying sleep patterns in young children. The Period of Purple Crying is an educational program that we've been using here at Madonna in collaboration with some efforts with Children's Hospital to implement it here inpatient, but also to share this program throughout the state with community agencies that work with parents, particularly high-risk parents. Because what this program does is it provides education about patterns of crying and provides educational tools for parents on how to manage crying. And it really normalizes crying. I mean, I think a lot of parents that lack skill feel that their children can't be crying. And so they really are approaching a period of what can be normal development without an awareness that what their baby is doing is okay. So starting from a basis of making crying to be understood as being a normal part of development, this program then can be expanded to much more high-risk families by being provided. It's usually provided in birthing settings. So when a baby's born, hospitals that have implemented this program will have one of the nurses meet with the parents, show them the video. They take the video and the packet home, and then they have it and they share this information with members of the family who care for their baby, daycare providers that care for their baby, so that they know that everyone that is in their child's life is aware of crying patterns and is also aware of strategies to manage that crying. So what I want to do is turn this over to Charlie, and we're going to watch the first part of a two-section DVD. And this is the part that is kind of it's for parents, but it's also for professionals, and it describes the program in this period of purple crying. So it's about a 10-minute video. I'm not hearing any sound on that. Charlie, can you hear that?
We'll try that again.
Experience full of joy and pleasure. Most parents knew their baby would cry, of course, but for many parents, their crying can be far more than they ever expected.
I could never have been prepared for how I would feel as an individual when I had a child who cried like that.
The baby.
I was getting more and more frustrated, more and more angry. Why is this happening? What am I not doing? What is Karen not doing?
But I had absolutely no idea what that crying would be like, what it would do to our lives, how it would affect every aspect of our lives for the next 5 months. I would say I grew more frustrated as the months wore on, definitely more frustrated, because I knew what was coming every single night and that there was nothing I could do about it. And I would get frustrated, just, what do you want? I have tried everything. I love you, I want to comfort you, I'm trying my hardest, but it's not good enough.
We use the term the period of purple crying to talk about this crying that occurs in the first few months of life. And we do that because the letters of the word purple each stand for one of the characteristics, which is so frustrating for parents. The first P stands for the peak pattern, where the amount of crying that occurs per day goes up and up and up until the second or third month of life and then decreases. This crying can be either a lot or a little at the time of the peak crying. The U is for the fact that most of this crying is unexpected. It starts and it stops for no apparent reason, either in the environment or in the baby, and it is very frustrating to parents for that reason. The R is for the fact that these crying episodes are resistant to soothing no matter what you do. They're not related to feeding, they're not related to dirty diapers. So even though some of these bouts are unsoothable, it's still good to try to soothe the babies. If you do, you can reduce the crying by as much as 50%. The second P is because the baby looks like it's in pain even when it's not. And the L is for the fact that the crying bouts that go on at this time are very long. Some of them can be an hour or 2 hours in length. And they can cry as much as 5 or 6 hours a day and still be completely normal. The E is for the fact that it tends to cluster in the evening or the late afternoon, just when the parents are the most tired. All of these things together are frustrating. They're frustrating in and of themselves, and when they all occur at the same time, it can be terribly frustrating for parents, even though the baby's totally normal.
I couldn't make him stop crying. So I got frustrated. I felt like the worst mom on the planet. I felt like maybe I had a bad baby.
Knowing about the period of purple crying is very important because it allows you to plan ahead and know that this stressful, frustrating crying period is going to happen. And when you know that, you can do things for yourself and especially for other people who are going to take care of your infant to prevent that from happening.
I would just feel better about turning over Jack to somebody at that point in his life if we both understood what the period of purple crying was. If the caregiver, I could explain exactly, and they would know exactly what he's going through, that they're going to deal with the same problems that I've been dealing with that I need to take a break from.
And I would have been more comforted had I known, you know what, you may not be able to calm this baby down. And that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with your husband, and there's nothing wrong with that baby. It's just normal.
Finding out in the end that there is nothing you can do. You can't fix the problem. It took a lot of stress off of everything.
There's one very serious consequence that can come of this if parents aren't aware of it, and that is the condition we know of as shaken baby syndrome. And shaken baby syndrome happens at that instant when, in the midst of this frustration, the parents, the caregivers, whoever's taking care of the baby, just lose it. And they hear the crying, they're frustrated by it, they pick up the baby, and they shake the baby and say something like, "Don't do that. Why are you crying?" And in this instant, when the baby's head shakes back and forth, there's this very important danger and very sometimes fatal consequence of what we call shaken baby syndrome. There are a number of reasons why shaking is so dangerous. And one of these is because the baby's head is relatively big compared to its body at this age. The second is that the baby's neck muscles are not as strong as they will be later. But the most important reason is that the adult who does the shaking is so much stronger and so much more powerful than the infant.
The doctors had given her a CT scan, and it was apparent. You could see on the CT scan what brain cells were dying off, and the swelling of her brain and all that. So, you know, once you start realizing that all of these things are happening to this little baby's brain, you have to know that the outcome is not going to be good.
Now, this damage, unfortunately, causes very serious consequences. Some of that is blindness. Some of that is difficulty with motor function, like walking, talking, and so on. And also, later, learning disabilities and difficulty with behavior. And unfortunately, in the worst-case scenario, they can even cause death.
It was totally beyond my comprehension that something could have happened that caused Kelly to be in such a way as she was. She was so damaged.
I know that he loved Elijah. I know that he regrets what happened. But for one reason or the other, he lost absolutely all control that day.
Fortunately, there are some things you can do to prevent this from happening that can also help to comfort your baby.
We have what we call 3 action steps that are helpful. And the first is that when your baby cries, you want to increase the carry, comfort, walk, and talk responses that you do. Remember that some of the times, most of the times it will help, but the baby will still continue crying sometimes, and that's okay. The second thing is, if the crying continues, and it's very, very frustrating for you, it's okay to walk away. Put your baby down in a quiet place, make sure it's safe, and walk away from the baby and gather yourself together again. And the third thing, very important, never ever shake or hurt your baby.
I think that parents really need to know that, some people, their baby won't cry to the levels that will absolutely frustrate them. But there are families who will have crying babies and have moments with their children that will cause them to get frustrated. And that frustration is okay. It is absolutely okay to feel frustrated. I didn't know that. That was another thing that compounded, made me feel even worse as a parent, because I didn't know it was okay to be frustrated.
It's okay to be frustrated. It's what you do when you get frustrated. And I think the biggest thing that we have to stress is set the baby down in a safe place. Make sure the baby is safe and walk away. Whether it be 5 minutes and you go back and check on the baby, whether it be 10 minutes and you go back and check on the baby. Go downstairs, do something that you enjoy doing. But you can't calm that crying child when you're already frustrated. You have to calm yourself and then try to go back and calm the child, because it's probably not going to work if you do it any other way.
It's important to let everybody who takes care of your child know about the period of purple crying and how frustrating it can be. And you may also want to be careful about who you leave your baby with. If they're going to be frustrated by the crying, then it's probably better not to leave your baby with those relatives or friends or whoever else it might be. And you want to make sure that at some point your doctor or your physician or your healthcare worker gets a chance to examine your baby to make sure there's nothing else causing the crying. And finally, take care of yourself. Do whatever it takes to give yourself a break, to have some respite, to enjoy music or whatever it is that calms you down.
And it seems like you will not make it out of this time, that these few months are going to last forever. But they really do pass, and it's not your fault. It's not anything you're doing wrong, and it's not anything your baby's doing wrong. You will survive.
And Jack was on kind of the extreme end of it. He was a very colicky baby, but he was a healthy baby. Just like any of the programs showed, he turns out just fine.
He sure did.
Okay, Paul, if you want to turn your microphone back on.
Okay. So why is prevention so important with this? Well, when we think about the fact that birth to 4 is one of the highest incidents, or has one of the highest incidents of traumatic brain injury within the entire population, the cost to the infant's development, the even mild cases where there's changes in development, changes in learning, changes in social behavior that are going to impact that child's life for the rest of their life, to the more severe cases where there's profound injury, where the children are going to need medical care for the rest of their life, where their life could be shortened because of secondary conditions such as seizure disorders or other secondary neurological conditions. And if we know that this is preventable, at least in a proportion of the cases, then it's really worth the effort. Now, there are a number of states that have implemented the period of purple crying as their primary prevention program. Unfortunately, in the Midwest, the belt from North Dakota down to Texas, Nebraska, Oklahoma, were a few of the states that haven't fully implemented this program, but there are efforts to do that. This is one of a number of programs. The Period of Purple Crying program has been shown to have the most palpable message for parents. It was put together that involved a process of a number of parent focus groups so that the message was really refined in a way that would be heard at various stages. So not only when a child is first born, when it's first presented, but in secondary level of prevention when the message is again provided in community settings, in daycare settings, in preschool settings, community agencies, home visiting programs where the program is introduced. That's the secondary level of prevention. And that's where I would encourage all of you, if you are interested in knowing more about it, let me know. My email is pray@madonna.org. Shoot me off an email and I can send you a packet of this so that you can take a look at it for yourself, see if it's something that your agency might want to use in a prevention level. So this Period of Purple Crying program also has a second video to it that is really designed more for providing parents with real strategies on how to soothe their baby. And I think that we'll probably have some time tonight to show that second part. I'd like you all to be exposed to that too. So again, you know, why do babies cry? Well, babies cry for a lot of reasons. It's the only way that they communicate. They're hungry, they need to burp, they're too hot, too cold, they're tired, they're overstimulated, colic, gas pains, all the reasons that we know. Why babies cry? They may be reacting to the caregiver stress. And again, the National Center on Shaken Baby Syndrome coined this acronym PURPLE for the peak, unpredictable, resistant, painful looking, lengthy, and evening crying of a typical healthy infant. And again, this is a period where there's, this is usually before, usually the period of purple crying is going to peak somewhere in the first couple of months. By 6 months, usually there's enough neural regulation where those arousal states where the baby is just discharging this high states of arousal that's accumulated throughout the day in this crying, usually that's in a typically developing child, that will be regulated, and it won't be that much of an issue. The parents and the child will live through it all and go on and enjoy life. Now for some children, it's even harder if we think of children that have been exposed to jugs in utero. Part of their challenges, what's been demonstrated, is that those periods of arousal are much more prolonged. They underlie later developmental conditions such as attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity. And again, that's based on immaturity of the nervous system to really be able to regulate the arousal states and to have the capacity to really inhibit a lot of impulse and erratic behavior. Now I think what I'd like to do, Charlie, is maybe move in and show the other part of this video. It's about 8:30 now, and the second section is maybe about 17 minutes. And I think it would be interesting for people to see this, and then if you have questions, we can talk more about this program after. A lot of the information will be similar to what's already been said, but this would be information that then parents would have that they could be working with a professional to review some of these techniques if they need a little extra support, or just have it for themselves to review, to share with family members, to share with daycare providers, really anybody that's in their child's life providing care. Okay, I'm going to mute my microphone, Charlie, so anytime you want to start that.
Throughout my life with a new baby, I knew it'd be different, but I don't think I ever really understood how much different it would be.
Very frustrated. Felt like I was doing something wrong. I couldn't do it as good as my wife. The incidents where I just have to take a deep breath. I mean, I've been incidents where I've been so frustrated I yelled at the top of my lungs.
I didn't know how to hold her. I didn't know how to soothe her. I didn't know how to make her stop crying.
Yeah, I mean, I knew about purple crying before I had her, but you always think it's not going to be your baby.
As it continued throughout the weeks and months, we soon figured out it wasn't going to be temporary.
Most of us have imagined how our baby will behave. We know that our baby will cry, but we believe we'll be able to soothe him. What actually happens, however, is that soothing works some of the time, but nothing works all of the time.
That's one of the worst things a father can hear, is your newborn daughter just crying bloody murder and you can't do anything to help.
When I hold my baby, I should be able to, be the super dad, or be her security blanket, and hasn't always been the case.
I always thought that I could calm her down, even if somebody else could. I could, no matter, I'm the mom. That's my job.
You feel like this is your child and your bond, and that bond should be able to cure anything.
Sometimes, Charlie, I'm hearing it, but I'm not seeing it.
Your baby will come.
Okay. No, it's on.
No matter what you do.
Thoughts had crossed my mind that, I don't know what I'm going to do to this baby if he doesn't stop crying.
I thought I was going to throw her out the window. And so I called my mom. My mom came. So, yeah. It does get hard, and you don't know what to think. You don't know what to do, but sometimes you just need help.
Soothing is one of the biggest problems for those who care for new babies. So we're going to talk about what's going on when babies cry, how babies can be soothed, and what you can do when soothing doesn't work. Soothing your baby may turn out to be more interesting than you imagine. You might also be surprised by how much you already know. If soothing doesn't work, you may feel tired, frustrated, angry, and very worried. But that does not mean that you or your baby have failed. Sometimes soothing doesn't work, and that's normal and okay.
You just feel like a failure, and you don't know what they want. Sometimes you can't figure it out, and sometimes you won't figure it out, and you just have to accept it.
He would be crying nonstop, and one day I called Jorgen at work and I said, "You need to come home. I can't handle it anymore. I don't know what to do." I put him in his crib and I went in the other room and I screamed myself, and I don't know what else to do.
What's going on when babies cry? As you have learned from the Period of Purple Crying DVD and booklet, the amount of crying that all healthy babies do begins to increase at about 2 weeks of age, is the most during the second or third month, and may continue until your baby is about 4 to 5 months of age.
During this period, some babies are said to have colic. This can be confusing and concerning. It sounds like an illness and suggests that only some babies cry a lot, while others do not. But the period of purple crying is a period of increased crying that all babies go through, and that is completely normal.
This early increase in crying includes fussing, crying, and some crying that cannot be soothed even when your baby has been fed, burped, and changed.
Crying that can't be soothed can happen a lot in the first 5 months, but it's uncommon after 5 months. When it happens, you may feel frustrated, worried, and angry. You may feel like you have failed at caring for your baby. So let's talk about what you and others can do to make this early crying as good an experience as it can be.
The best thing about soothing your baby is that there are a number of simple, available ways to soothe that anyone can use. They are things you can do naturally that don't require special skills or using any store-bought items. Changing a baby's position can be soothing. For example, this happens when moving your baby from a cradle hold to upright on your shoulder, or picking up your baby from a crib. Movement can be soothing. For example, this happens when carrying your baby in a baby carrier or sling, taking your baby for a walk or a car ride, or rocking your baby gently back and forth. White noise is a kind of background noise that can be soothing. White noise comes from the sounds of running water or waves, the whirring of a fan, a dishwasher, bubbles in a fish tank, or the sound of a vacuum cleaner.
I would take Chase, our first son, into the bathroom and turn the shower on. And I don't know if it was the shower, a little bit of the steam, or what, but that would soothe him and he'd be able to fall asleep.
Rhythms and repetition can be soothing. This happens when you sing a lullaby to your baby. Your baby hears your heartbeat when you're holding her to your chest. Going for a car ride by the sound of tires on pavement. Or going for a walk by the sound of footsteps. Smells and a change in smells can be soothing. This happens when a different person takes care of your baby, which means a change in smells for your baby. Going outside to take a walk. Or when giving your baby a bath. Sucking can be soothing. Perhaps the best example is when an infant is breastfeeding. But infants are also soothed by sucking that is not from being hungry. This happens when allowing your baby to suck his own finger, sucking on your cleaned finger, or sucking a pacifier. Pacifiers can be used after breastfeeding is going well. Closeness can be soothing. The best example of this is just holding your baby. He feels warmth from your body, touch from your skin, and a smell that your baby is used to. Now here's something important. Sights, sounds, and smells of a person are more soothing than any toys, mobiles, or other things you can buy. Putting many of these ways of soothing together can be even better. Each way of soothing by itself helps, but they're more effective when done together. Breastfeeding involves more of your baby's senses at one time than any other way to soothe. Breastfeeding is probably the best soothing behavior we know. Fathers or others caring for your baby can give almost the same soothing by being skin to skin with their baby. If the baby has something to suck on, it's even better.
We suggested a lot of things to try, and you might be wondering, is there a best way to soothe my baby? Well, there is no best way, but there are 5 that we like the most. These include holding your baby in your arms or with a baby carrier or sling, breastfeeding, putting your baby skin to skin, letting your baby suck on his own finger, your clean finger, or a pacifier, or going for a walk. However, if your baby is crying hard, it may be difficult to do these things. If you're feeling angry or frustrated, you may need to put your baby down and try again later.
We have talked about many experiences happening at the same time, all of which can be soothing. But you should be aware of something that's the opposite of soothing, called overstimulation.
As an adult, you know when things are too confusing, too busy, or too much to deal with in a day. But your baby depends on you to make sure this doesn't happen to him. The key here is to put your baby first by listening to him, watching his behavior, and what's working for him. For example, if you have lots of people over visiting, or are trying to distract your baby with noise and bright lights, and your baby cries more, this may be overstimulating your baby. Everything you do to soothe your baby must be done safely. For example, safety instructions must be followed on how to place your baby properly in a car seat to prevent risk of injury. Also, it's important to never fall asleep with your baby on a couch or in a bed. This may risk the danger of blocking your infant's breathing. However you choose to soothe your baby, use common sense to keep your baby safe.
There are things you can buy that use some of the soothing ideas we have talked about, such as machines that produce the sounds of heartbeats, white noise, rain, or other sounds of nature. There are crib vibrators and rockers, baby swings, and lullaby CDs. If okay for your baby's age, they can work too. However, none of them do anything differently or work better than you can do yourself, or doing what comes naturally. There are two more general things to suggest when soothing your baby. 1. Soothing works better if used as a typical part of daily baby care, rather than only after crying begins.
Rather than just carrying your baby when he's crying, carry your baby even when he isn't crying. The baby will be calmer if you use the ways of soothing we talked about as part of your daily baby care. Despite it being a common belief, there is no evidence that this will spoil your baby.
2. Some ways to soothe your baby work some of the time, but nothing works all of the time.
It would be great if you just said the right way to soothe and crying would stop. But babies aren't like that. They don't have an on-off switch like machines do. It's completely normal that soothing works some of the time, but nothing works all of the time.
What happens if you think something you do to soothe your baby will work, and it doesn't?
You may think you have failed somehow, or that you have a bad baby. If you think it was the right way to soothe your baby, you may feel even worse. But unsuccessful soothing is okay, expected, and normal. When soothing doesn't work, you need to find ways to help yourself, or ways to cope. You can't help soothe your baby unless you are calm yourself.
We have all been told about ways to calm down. Exercise, listen to music, take deep breaths, and so on. If these work for you, do them. But when you're stressed, these may not be easy to do.
For myself, I'll just get on the computer because work kind of soothes me. And so just thinking that I'm being productive in some way, if I can't be with the child, then at least I can answer some emails or something. And we like to go outside and sit on the bench.
I go out and do yard work. As much as I hate yard work, it's my time alone.
Something you can do is simply to try and understand what it is you're feeling and allow yourself to feel that. One way to do this is to become focused on what you're doing. For example, if you're fixing dinner, tell yourself, I'm fixing dinner, and things will get better. You might feel funny doing this, but it will bring your thoughts back to what you're doing at the moment. This can help you control your upsetting feelings. The main point is to do whatever you need to do to help yourself be calm.
Doing things that I like to do while she was asleep, taking naps, was a great help.
Some of the things you do to soothe your baby may also be calming for you. Going for a walk gets you out of your home, gets you moving, and gets you into fresh air. Or closeness from holding your baby gives you a chance to enjoy the comfort this brings and helps you be calm.
It's okay to take a break, and to take a break responsibly. Maybe in your family or culture, you're not supposed to leave your baby even for a moment. Maybe you believe you're doing something wrong or being selfish. Maybe others will say this to you.
Some of my family has a hard time understanding that she just cries because she just cries.
She's not sick. She doesn't have an upset stomach. So they think that you should be able, there's something to do. You should be able to fix it.
For my first experience, when I really thought I was going to hurt my child, I never would have forgiven myself if I would have done something, but I can forgive myself for leaving her in her room.
But if you're feeling frustrated, the best thing you can do is to get away from the crying for a while and calm down. This does not mean that you are a bad mother or father. It only means that you are normal.
When you do take a break responsibly. Lay your baby on their back. Lay your baby in a safe place, like a crib. Take some time to calm down, but check on your baby often, about every 10 to 15 minutes.
It's okay to ask for help. Ask someone you trust, a spouse, a partner, a friend, a grandparent. Ask somebody who can be patient with a crying baby. Tell them about the period of purple crying and that it's normal. And of course, you can always ask your healthcare provider for advice.
This can be a hard time for a new parent and their family. Try to remember 4 important things about soothing as you and your baby go through this period. Soothing your baby works some of the time, but nothing works all of the time. Soothing works better if used as a typical part of daily baby care rather than only after crying begins. If soothing doesn't work, it does not mean you have failed or that you have a bad baby. Soothing that doesn't work is okay, expected, and normal. The crying is only for a period. This too will come to an end when your baby is about 4 or 5 months of age.
As we talked about, all of the ways of soothing your baby are things you can do yourself, and they're best done by you when you're taking care of your baby. Keep trying different ways of soothing your baby. They can be more interesting and imaginative than you think. And remember, it's okay to be frustrated. It's what you do when you're frustrated that's important.
The best experience I had is the first time she really smiled. Not the little half smile or whatever, but the first real smile that you knew that was coming because you were making her smile.
It's easy to get caught up in an hour of screaming and think it's going to go on forever and ever, but it will end.
Much as I say, she cries when I can make her laugh. It makes me feel so good. You can see that smile on her face.
Holding my sons close to me, regardless of whether they're crying or not, it's special. So I think, especially when it works out, you can take weeks of crying and crying, but when they fall asleep, you hold them close in your hands and makes it all work.
So again, this is a program of the National Center on Shaken Baby Syndrome. It's implemented in a number of states throughout the country. It's actually a 3-tier approach, the first being the distribution of the packet that has these 2 videos with a pamphlet that describes some of the soothing techniques that is given to parents when the baby's born. The second tier of the program is for community agencies when there's a second level of contact, when there's conditions where it's beneficial for the families to hear the message several times, where they might need some additional support. And the third level that this program is implemented on is on a community level. And here at Madonna Rehabilitation Hospital, again, we've been working in collaboration with Children's Hospital to have this program implemented throughout the state. I think based on the work that we do here in long-term rehabilitation, both inpatient and outpatient, with on our pediatric unit, we've seen a number of children with varying levels of injury due to these kind of conditions, and just feel that it's an effort worth making if there's a program like this that can prevent some of these tragic situations from happening. So I don't have any other information tonight. Are there any questions? Well, again, I want to thank you all for spending your time with me tonight. If you would like to contact me and to have more information about the program, again, my email address is pray@madonna.org. You can also email me at PAULARAYPSYD@mac.com, either one. And I would love to share some more information with you, send you a packet if you'd like, or several, and help you all, help with the efforts of getting the word out about this wonderful prevention program. So, well, if there's no questions, I guess we can end and call it a night. Okay, and again, thank you all for joining.